Imagine a country once written off as a failed state, and now we have witnessed it rise from the ruins to become one of Africa's most promising and stable economies today. Achieving such a turnaround demands bold reforms and a fundamental shift in economic philosophy. In Uganda, this transformation is driven by what we know as Musevenomics. Musevenomics represents the economic management policies and philosophy implemented by President Yoweri Museveni that have transformed Uganda from a failed state in 1986 to one of Africa's most promising and stable economies today. Musevenomics seeks to transform Uganda into an independent, integrated, self-sustaining upper middle-income economy by 2040, where every Ugandan prospers. Musevenomics is not just about the economic history of Uganda, it's our roadmap to prosperity. By 2040, this philosophy aims to deliver a $500 billion economy, making us better than Denmark at $449 billion, Malaysia $444 billion, Philippines $497 billion, and in the same league with Norway, which is $504 billion. Such an economy means better healthcare, education, infrastructure, and living standards for every Ugandan family from Kampala to the remotest villages. Musevenomics is more than numbers and policies. It is a promise of prosperity based on a solid foundation and gains. Musevenomics for my country and my development.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for yet another episode of Musevenomics. In our first episode, we talked about Musevenomics, understanding Musevenomics. In our second episode, we talked about monetization of the subsistence economy as one of the principles of Musevenomics. And today, again, with Dr. Edward Katende, the Executive Director from Uganda Development Forum, we are here to talk about our third episode, our third principle of Musevenomics. And today we are looking at liberalization and strategic role of the state. So, Mr. Katende, welcome to our show.
Thank you very much, and good evening, our viewers out there.
So, our dear viewers, most of our Ugandans have been complaining that the government gave out companies which affected our economy in 1986. Mr. Katende here is going to give us his view on what he has to say about that. How was it in 1996?
Yeah, first of all, before talking about the situation in 1986, we need to appreciate what liberalization means, because I think some people misunderstand liberalization as abandoning the citizens. It's actually about creating conditions for enterprises to prosper. And in this particular case, for Uganda's case, we had to transfer loss-making enterprises to the private sector, which had the capability to run these enterprises, and let government focus on regulation and providing public services. So in liberalization in Uganda's case was more about giving power to the private sector, transferring those loss-making companies to the private sector. It entailed creating market freedoms by removing price controls. That time, government was controlling prices, creating conditions for trade to prosper by removing trade barriers, and a number of other interventions that attracted foreign investment into the country. In our first episode on Musevenomics, we learned that Uganda had been isolated by the world, had trade embargoes, nobody wanted to work with us. So we had to bring in the foreign investment into the country by creating those necessary conditions that enable the private sector to thrive. And now that we know what liberalization is, we then had to appreciate that was it a bad move? So before you even say it was a bad move, you need to appreciate the conditions, the situation in 1986. It was a dire situation, as we explained in our first episode. We must understand that this is an economic miracle. In 1986, what was the situation? Why? It was a crisis. Inflation was at 240% and above. Our manufacturing was growing at less than 5%. Not growing. Manufacturing was, factories were operating at less than 5% capacity. That was 1986 when the NRM took over. The government was contributing 15% of its budget to running these companies, the parastatals, because they were not generating enough revenue. They were running on obsolete technology. And as such, we had discussed it. We had what we call magendo economy, where we had to survive through the black markets. So, because of scarcity of goods on the market. So, we did not export any manufactured goods in Uganda. We were importing, but even importation, a lot of that was through smuggling. And then when they get into the market in Uganda, they are sold through what? They were sold through the black markets. So there was chronic shortage, and the treasury was depleted. So foreign exchange was in short supply. So in a situation like that, the decision to liberalize was not an option, but it was survival. We had to, there was financial hemorrhage. These companies were losing a lot of money. There was technological obsolescence. A lot of the technology was in the 60s, the 70s, and was not up to the stage where we needed to compete with the rest of the world. Then, of course, there are issues of resource allocation. You have HIV, which you must fight, the killer diseases, which you have to fight, the infrastructure, which has been completely destroyed. You have a war, which you have to fight, and we fought that war until 2006. So and then you don't have money. But the private sector has the money. So using the pillar of Musevenomics, which we looked at in the first episode, of the pillar of logic, and then the pillar of rationality, and the pillar of realism, which are key pillars of Musevenomics, we had to make that decision either to completely collapse or to recover our economy.
Okay.
Yes.
Now that we understand that liberalization was not optional, but survival, what did it entail?
Of course, in this particular case, liberalization entailed a number of things. First of all, between 1991 and 1997, we had to go for removing of price controls, ensuring that the goods and services, the price of goods and services was determined by the market forces. So government had to remove as many price controls as possible, and then focus more on regulating the industry, and then providing public services like health, education, infrastructure development, security, and what have you. It also involved, between 1992, we liberalized the foreign exchange market. Before 1992, if you wanted to go out of the country to buy anything, you had to apply to Bank of Uganda to access dollars or foreign currency. And they had window 1, window 2, and sometimes you may not get the money if you want it. Even if you're very rich and you have a lot of money in Uganda shillings, you may not be able to get that money. So what they did under the Bank of Uganda, they had to remove the foreign exchange controls, and then forex bureaus started coming up, and a number of businessmen, some of the richest people now, set up the first foreign exchange, forex bureaus, and they made quite good money. But that's now when we start seeing the foreign exchange being determined by market forces. But of course, the other thing was the divestiture, where we now sold off a number of our companies. But we did not sell everything. We kept some of the companies, but a number of the loss-making companies that were not considered to be so strategic in nature had to be divested. Remember, Musevenomics speaks from a number of schools of thought. We pick from Western capitalism, we pick from Asian development model, and then African collectival responsibility. So, in this particular case, when the government realized that some of the sectors were not so strategic, and those sectors, they could hand them over to the private sector. Those which were strategic in nature, the government retained the control, like energy generation, like security. So we kept companies in that space until, of course, later on when things got better. Of course, the other thing we had to do was to removing or dismantling the trade barriers. We even joined the East African Community, which was re-established in 1999. And of course, the resources that we saved from the liberalization. Remember, 15% of our budget was going to these loss-making companies. So now, the resources we saved in that exercise were now channeled to financing the strategic areas like security. We had over 56 rebel groups that we had to fight, and had to pacify the country, which was achieved by 2006. So the savings that we made from liberalization were used to invest in these strategic areas.
Thank you. So looking at liberalization now, that it is in place, what have been the results, or what can we say has been achieved in the different sectors? Let's say mining, energy, security. What do you have to say about the results?
Of course, liberalization, like most people do not appreciate the gains made by liberalization. But let's look at sectors. For example, banking sector. In 1986, only 1% of Ugandans had a bank account. As we speak today, over 24% have a bank account. 67% of the districts in Uganda now have the presence of a bank branch. Over 85% of the whole country have access to mobile money. Actually, with the introduction of Wendi under the parish development model, Wendi was introduced by Uganda government-owned banks, Pearl Bank, Housing Finance, and Pride. They introduced it under the implementation of the parish development model. Now, every parish in the country now can access banking services. They can receive their money, so remittances. They can save on their phone using USSD code on Wendi. They can transact. They can borrow. So basically, they can buy and sell goods in their local communities. But that was zero in 1986. So that is one of the areas where we can see gains. Certainly, people will say you sold Uganda Commercial Bank, UCB, in 2002. But while we sold it to Stanbic, Stanbic became Uganda's biggest bank. But these gains we are talking about, we now opened from 84 bank branches to over 450 branches across the country. We now have agency banking. We have mobile banking. Now, Pearl Bank, which was formerly called Post Bank, was started as a very small financial service provider. Today, they have even rebranded to Pearl Bank and 100% owned by government of Uganda. So we have replaced the UCB that we sold, and we have built from scratch a PAL Bank. Housing Finance Bank is there providing services to our people. Pride was established and has been serving the microfinance space. Microfinance Support Center has been established to provide wholesale facilities to circles and microfinance institutions across the country. With the PDM, now we have over 3.5 trillion invested. Then you have Uganda Development Bank, which was retained during the liberalization. UDB, Uganda Development Bank, was retained. We reintroduced Uganda Development Corporation, which had been closed as a result of the reforms, but it was reintroduced in 2017, and today has started financing our people. The second example is the telecom sector. In the telecom sector, in the 90s, you had the post office and Uganda Telecom as monopolies. Later on, when we opened up, UTL was there, but we also had MTN, which came in, Airtel came in, and now we have a fully liberalized telecoms sector, reaching and innovating services that not only improve access to telecommunication services, but powering the mobile money platforms. We had only one radio station, Radio Uganda.
Radio Uganda.
We had only one TV station, UTV. Today, we have over 70 television stations, excluding the online television platforms. We have over 350 radio stations across the country. What did the government do? Of course, we introduced UCC to regulate. Like I said, with the liberalization, what we can't do, what we would cost us, we give it to the private sector to run. Then government remained with UCC, remained into the regulation. And it is a vibrant sector. During COVID-19, it facilitated a lot of our transactions and actually our growth. A lot of the growth came from that sector, which contributes about 7% of our GDP. We have, beyond telecoms, of course, and voice, there is the digital economy, the infrastructure investments that have been made in masts, in fiber networks. So all this has been done under PPPs with the private sector. Manufacturing is another sector where we have made tremendous growth. We are producing things that we never produced in 1986. For example, we are manufacturing pharmaceutical products in Uganda. We produce drugs, we produce antimalarials, you produce antibiotics. And export to 15 countries in Africa. We are producing steel and construction materials. If you look at companies like roofings, they have been producing a lot of our steel products. But companies like Tembo are now manufacturing from our iron ore, from Chigezi, and some people say it in Tungam as well. Our iron ore, right from processing the iron ore into final products, all done here in Uganda for the Ugandan market and the export market. We have the construction industry, for example, in the cement, Toro, Hima, and others who are producing cement here in Uganda. We have the beverages, the sodas, the beers. A lot of the beer in those days used to come from abroad. Now we are producing our own beer in Uganda. We are even getting smaller players playing in that space and well regulated and properly serving the people of Uganda. So of course, the textiles and garment industry, we have, if you go visit industrial parks like Kapeka, if you go to Mbale Industrial Park, if you go to Namamve, you will see we have companies that are producing textiles in Uganda for the Ugandan market, but also for export in the US and in Europe. Of course, on the textiles we're producing, if you go to Kaumo, there is a leather tanning factory there. We produce shoes. I bought my belt from there. I bought a bag, pure quality, world-class leather coming from Uganda. Of course, we have others beyond what I've just said, the plastics and the packaging industries. If you look at Nice, House of Plastics, and others are producing plastic products for packaging, but also used in the construction sector, in the irrigation sector. In agro-processing, we have companies that are growing, private sector companies like Mandela Miras, Tilda Rice. So they are doing maize flour, doing rice, processing back here in Uganda. Jessa in the dairy sector. You have Pearl Dairy, which is producing dairy products for export and product in the local market. So definitely there has been a lot achieved in the industrial space. But beyond the traditional manufacturing, we are producing a number of products that we never produced. For example, electronics. We're producing TV sets in Uganda. I saw, for example, in PDM, we have given out tablets to each and every parish. Two tablets, and another tablet has been sent recently per parish. One for the parish chief, one for the PDM circle. These tablets are manufactured here in Uganda, in Namamve, in Kapeka. We are producing from, of course, we have even started producing cars. Kira Motors assembling cars in Uganda. So then beyond this, we have industrial parks. 25 industrial parks have been earmarked. 13 of them are now operational. So all these are providing jobs, are creating jobs for thousands, hundreds of thousands of Ugandans. Another sector certainly is the energy sector, where, of course, the government retained a full control in generation, but we were involved in distribution. Of course, most people know only about Umeme, but there were many other companies that were involved in the distribution of power. That is now with hydro. About 42% of Ugandans have access to the grid, but that excludes those who are accessing solar power. We are providing gas, cooking gas, as an alternative energy solution to firewood. Our energy sector our energy produced in Uganda has grown 23 times since 1986. Of course, we are producing like 60 megawatts internally in Uganda. This is a huge achievement compared to about 1% of Ugandan households that had access to electricity. When I was growing up, electricity was for the affluent. But nowadays, even a small house will have access. We have invested heavily in rural electrification, and that has enabled a number of households to access. But this has been done jointly. If we look at power generation, for example, we have public-private partnerships for Bujagali. We are producing with the private sector. And now the other sector is education, which has grown tremendously. From one university to over 50 licensed institutions. My days, it was only Makerere University. If you missed Makerere University, some people would cry. You would think it was the end of the world. Now you have choices. Teaching from certificate course to PhD level without leaving Uganda. But some are government, some are private sector. Of course, quality is still an issue in some places, but we can compete with the best in the region. We are attracting different players coming from across the continent to study from Uganda, courtesy of the many universities that we have. When you go to primary school, if you go to kindergarten, if you go to secondary school, many created established by Ugandans, and the government's role has been mainly in regulation. Of course, as we learned under the Musevenomics principle of human capital development, you will find that government still retained control in this space, especially in providing universal primary education, which was driven by the rationality, the intelligence, the data that government collected, which showed that a number of Ugandans were not accessing education because they could not afford school fees. Government came and said, we will provide a tuition. Let all Ugandans go and study. 2007, they introduced universal secondary education. At university level, they still retained the public universities, introduced quota systems. There was a time when we had the 1.5 points given as an affirmative action to encourage as many women to attend university. So, but the government was still playing in that space alongside the private sector. There are other sectors like mining, unlocking Uganda's mineral wealth. So if you look at gold processing now, we are processing gold in Uganda and export processed gold. These were not there in 1986. We are involved in cement and aggregates, which is 100% private sector. We are getting the in the oil and gas sector. Exploration was done by private companies. If you look at Tullow Oil, all these other companies, Total, were private foreign companies. But which, as we are developing that sector together with the government of Uganda. So in this particular scenario, it is not true that liberalization abandoned the citizens. It is not true that liberalization destroyed the economy or destroyed the companies. Actually, the facts on the ground are demonstrating that we're doing far much better today than we used to do in 1986.
Some critics argue or are saying that there is no country that has developed using foreign money or foreign aid.
Yes.
What would you have to say about that?
Of course, they are wrong. People would go to the industrial parks and see many foreign businesses, foreign owners involved in our industries. But if you look at, for example, all our, like in education, this is local money. If you go to health sector, the private sector involved in the private in health is all local, is Ugandan. If you look at, of course, when you come to energy, the capital required is huge. The technology required is huge. There you have foreign investors. If you come to manufacturing, you have both local and international for foreign investors. So the foreign direct investment plays a huge role. You don't expect everything to be done by the state for a number of reasons. One is the capital. If you look at the infrastructure, I mean in manufacturing, in energy, in oil and gas, the amount of money required, the investment, the initial capital outlay is enormous. Do we want Ugandans to go and government of Uganda to go and keep borrowing when we can get our partners to get involved in manufacturing in Uganda? The second thing is the technical know-how. You may have all the money in the world, but you need experts, the expertise that you don't have. We have never had anybody manufacturing cars in the country. So we have to send our children abroad to study and then come back with the technologies. But if you go to drug manufacturing, you have Cipla coming in from India. They come with expertise in drug manufacturing, which can make us competitive. That technology which they use is patented. So can we buy the patent? That is a lot of money. Or can we bring that person in Uganda with a technical know-how and they co-invest with the Ugandans? Of course, the other thing apart from technology is the markets. Some of the foreign direct investors that come to invest in a country have an exit in terms of market access to their home countries. So they will come produce in Uganda and then export the products to their home countries. So we have precedents. We are learning from the winners, from the best in the world. So it is not true that no country has ever developed. China alone established economic zones and attracted big companies like Volkswagen, Ford, to go and establish in China and start producing from China for export. Vietnam, in 1986, at the same time when NRM came to power, they had a policy called Doi Moi, which attracted a number of foreign investors into Vietnam. And as we speak today, Vietnam is a very big manufacturer. They manufacture many things. And Uganda can pick a lesson. There are other countries like South Korea. They established their own companies, but those companies didn't have capital. They did not have the technical know-how. So they had to attract foreign direct investors who would go and co-invest with local companies. Now we have companies like Samsung competing with American companies like Apple. But it was a deliberate government effort to attract foreign direct investors into Singapore, rather into Korea, so that they can produce into South Korea and then export. Of course, Singapore is another good example. So they could not have that miracle that they have without the influence of foreign companies. So they had to apply. So no country is an island. We cannot say Uganda can do it on its own. We must learn from winners. Certainly, the way Britain did it is completely different. The colonial masters, much as they did not, one can say they used their money, it was not their money. They got free stuff from Africa, almost free everything. Labor, the slaves, they had our minerals, everything they needed to kickstart their industrial agenda. But most recent countries that have made it have used foreign direct investment.
Okay. There is nothing that comes without challenges.
Yes.
However much liberalization has all these nice things, the results, we are looking at the employment opportunities and what else.
Yeah.
There are definitely some challenges.
Yes.
What could be those challenges?
Okay, before I talk about the challenges, I also need to talk about the gains. Because you can't focus more on the challenges. Every country has challenges, but I'm not going to dodge your question. The reality, the numbers are clear. The evidence is overwhelming. Uganda has transformed. Our economy has grown between 6 to 7% since 1986, consistently, except for 2020, where we had the COVID-19. We grew by about 3.5%. But other countries were actually in negative growth. 24% of our GDP is coming from manufacturing. 24%. Agriculture is 26%. Industry is 40%, or rather service is 42%. But 24% of our GDP is now coming from manufacturing. In 1986, it was about 1 to 2%. 2.5 million jobs are coming from manufacturing alone. $3 billion revenue is coming from export of manufactured goods. It's actually 23% of all our exports is coming from manufactured goods, which it was zero in 1986. So the numbers are telling a very good story, and the future is bright. However, this it has not come without challenges. Certainly there are challenges. For example, the transitional job losses, that when you closed company X, people who worked for that company lost jobs. In my previous life, I worked as a business recovery specialist, turning around businesses that had financial problems. So when a business has financial problems, redundancies are unavoidable. So this transition, as we liberalized our economy, of course, had people who lost the jobs. And that became a challenge Of course, many of them became poor, many never recovered. Of course, the price increases in the olden days when the government was setting the prices, there was a price for each and every essential commodity. And of course, that also led to black market. So when that was removed, the many prices of many goods started going up. But with competition over time, the prices started coming down because they were determined by the forces of demand and supply. Of course, there is the uneven distribution of growth. Buganda, let me say Kampala, and most parts of Mukono, Wachiso benefited more. So that uneven distribution of wealth. They benefited more from the liberalization exercise. If you look at some of the top schools in the country, in the GK area, if you look at many of the industrial parks that are currently operational, much as we want to expand to other regions, a lot of them are in the GKM area. So regions like Uganda benefited a lot. Other regions like Karamoja, Acholi have not benefited so much. However, for the likes of Acholi, they were under a prolonged civil conflict up to 2006. And then after that, there was a reconstruction of the post-conflict area, building roads. As we speak, a number of industries have now started coming up in Acholi. We have an industrial hub there. The train will be re-established to reach there. That is the meter gauge rail. So it is being reconstructed to reach. But that became a big one of the challenges that came out of liberalization. And some of the people who are crying about it are mainly because they were affected. They were in the affected areas. But I have heard people talking about ginger, that how ginger was destroyed, and that is factually incorrect. Actually, ginger now has more industries than it used to. What the former Nightil has been rebranded. Nightil is back. Nightil is making textiles as it used to be. Nile Breweries is there. We have an industrial park there with over 100 companies. That industrial park is now full. They are actually looking for a second industrial park. And that's an opportunity for the private sector to come in if the government cannot set up another one. We can learn from Kapeka, which is a 100% private sector initiative. So even in Jinja, any private sector actor can go there and establish, but it is actually much more vibrant in terms of industrial activity than it was before. But of course, that time, it was more like the monopoly. That almost every manufactured good was coming from ginger. But remember, manufacturing was contributing about 2%, and we were not exporting anything. So now we are 24%, and that 24% is coming from the various industrial areas. Ruzira Industrial Park is there, Kapeka is there, Namambe is there, Mbale is there, and many others that are growing as we speak.
So looking at our target as a country, right now everyone talks about the $500 economy, the tenfold strategy, growth strategy. What would the future hold, or how would you put it? How does the future look?
Of course, the future is bright. But before I talk about the future, it is a very big mistake to think that liberalization meant wholesale abandonment of everything we are doing. That is also not correct. We retained some companies. For example, National Water and Sewage Corporation. It has been actively run 100% by the government of Uganda. The electricity generation company has been generating electricity in Uganda 100%. And of course, over time, we have got others. Uganda Revenue Authority, certainly, was not there in 1986, but it was established, run by the government, and has enabled us to collect more revenue from about 2-3% in 1986 to 14% of GDP. Uganda Development Bank, I already talked about it, is now financing our development, and it was retained. It has been financing our development as a country. Of course, on that you add UDC, which came later, and the institutions that I've talked about. So while we liberalized, we did not liberalize 100%. It was not wholesale abandonment of our companies. However, given the question you have asked, what does the future hold for Uganda? You have heard about the tenfold growth strategy. The tenfold growth strategy, which is being implemented and led by the Ministry of Finance, is meant to grow our economy, to convert our economy into a $500 billion economy. And previously I explained what that looks like. So in that 500 billion economy, we are going to be industry-led. So it's anchored mainly on 4 key sectors, but all of them, except tourism, are agro-related. Number one, not agro, all of them are industry-related. Number one is the agro-industrialization. So about 200 of the 500 billion will come from agro-industrialization in the next 15 years. Then you have the mineral-based manufacturing, including oil and gas. So we have already established our pipeline. We are establishing a refinery in Uganda, but a number of other industries or along petrochemical industries, fertilizer industries will come up. Plastic manufacturing will come up as a result of our investment in oil and gas. So then you have science, technology, and innovation. I already told you about Kira Motors, which is assembling cars, and we are going to do much bigger things. So the next 15 years, we are focusing to be industry-led, manufacturing-led, so that we can grow faster and create more jobs for Ugandans. That said, there are what we call enablers. We are the enablers, like investment in security, investment in infrastructure. We'll continue to invest in roads, in rail, in electricity that will power the industrial growth of the country. So, in a nutshell, the future for our country's industrialization is bright.
So as we come to a conclusion, Doctor,
yes,
what is your call to action for Ugandans?
My call to action for Ugandans is that we must appreciate that Uganda is unquestionably better positioned for prosperity today than it was in 1986. But we need to look at data. Let's not make sweeping statements. I see sentiments about people who used to benefit from the companies that were liberalized. I see sentiments from people who were told stories by their parents that this is what happened before 1986. They paint a picture of life being far better. But the numbers are showing that life is far better today than it was in the past. But also we should not dwell a lot in the past. We need to focus on the future. Our economy will grow into a $500 billion economy. There will be opportunities for every Ugandan. Better schools, better health, better infrastructure, better quality of life. And the private sector will take a key role in this $500 billion economy, which means we'll have more and richer Ugandans than ever before. And life certainly will transform. There is no scarcity. Scarcity is now confined in the history books. But there will be abundance in every part of Uganda. Markets will be transformed because now we can access better quality and well-paying markets globally, because we will be complying with international standards. We are producing use internationally recognized technologies. The know-how is here. The digital economy will be bigger because of our investments in science, technology, and innovation. And then, of course, there will be financial inclusion. Our investments in parish development model, in EMIOGA, and other programs, our investments in rural infrastructure will certainly pay off. And in my view, life will be far better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you to our audience. It has been lovely having you this evening. Joel and Shemeza has been your host this evening. See you on the next episode.